learners. Today's topic is about engaging learners. So one of the key things that we need to perhaps reflect on is why engage learners and what is the outcome. So perhaps all of us as educators, one of the key things that we need to reflect on is obviously, right, depending on the subject context, what is our focus? We want to get our students optimized in terms of whatever knowledge or perhaps skills that we would like to want them to gain. So one of the key things, perhaps from the research as well as a practitioner on the ground, I find very useful is perhaps the pedagogy learning design, right? That would probably help us achieving or walking towards that pathway. Now, without further ado, let me share with you the screen, and the first half, or rather the first part of it, is actually some of my sharings, and then I would like to engage and share some of the perspective and answer to my best ability some of the questions that you may have. Right? Let me do that. Let me start off. I presume that all of you could see this the screen. Let me just yeah. So engaging learners flipped classroom approach. That is our topic today. Now, let me touch on the agenda. What we would be covering today, right? A couple of things that I'm intending to focus on. First, why flip the class? Secondly, some of the key thrusts in terms of theoretical perspectives that I would like to talk about very succinctly pertaining to flipped classroom as a pedagogy. And thirdly, I would like to share with you the evidence-based conceptual framework that we have developed, validated, putting that into practice in class. And I'll share with you the applied case study, or perhaps in my view at least, in my team's view, is to a certain extent a success story where we see not only positive affirmative feedback from our students over the many semesters, but also the efficacy of in terms of their learning, right? Achieving their learning outcomes. And I'll share with you quickly on some of the research findings, right, about the efficacy of the framework. Okay? And last not least, recommendation and some concluding thoughts. Let me first address why it is important, or perhaps it's worthwhile for us to flip the class. Now, three key pointers that I thought it is important for us to start reflecting on as educators and individuals that design a course and implement them. Now, first, the ability of us to respond with an agile mindset and have a foresight to perhaps engage our learners. Why we want to improve or enhance the learning outcomes. So when I say agile mindset here, I'm kind of referring to the ability of the changes, the profile of our students, how they learn, what and how they learn effectively. What are some of the changes over the last decade that has happened? Number two, also understanding there are many disruptions, be it digital, and I indicated here digital transformation, but beyond digital transformation, how could we have that pulse or sense of what is happening, take that into consideration, and put that into learning design? Last not least, the learning designs of pedagogies must, in my opinion, incorporate such disruptions, difficulties, challenges, so that we would be able to more effectively respond to the needs of learners and the way they learn. So flipping the class enable us to bring, by and large, the contents outside the class in the best effective manner. There are many creative ways, depending on the subject context, that we can do that. And then so that the class time is literally for us to focus on more interactivity, engagement in terms of making sure that we get them do things, authentic learning, so they can learn. Perhaps we can move them nearer to what we want to achieve. So some theoretical grounding I want to talk about in terms of flipped classroom. What is flipped classroom? is generally defined as a swap.
Kumaran, I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you want to put it on the slideshow setting or keep it on your notes setting?
On my side, it's at this. It is in the slideshow.
Here we can see your notes page as well.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Shall I do this? Perhaps would it be better? Do you think this is better? If I do this, because once I put it on screen share or slideshow, that's what you see earlier. Which one would you prefer? Would you prefer this way? If I just put it this way and perhaps make
yes,
it...
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. So let's do that. Thanks for the feedback, Mark. Appreciate that. Now, let me continue. So flipped classroom generally is a swap of what we do in the class, bringing the contents outside the class so that we can have learning activities, hands-on, much more while we are having a face-to-face or virtual classroom. So it focuses on learner-centered environment, involves interactive learning activities. So be it online or be it virtual or be it face-to-face. So we can actually really focus on the activities, and the activities can be defined, have to be defined in terms of the subject context. It also serves a platform to achieve collaborative and organic learning environment. For example, maybe in management, we tend to do case study, we tend to do role play, we tend to do problem-based activities. So we can focus on that activity pertaining to certain learning outcomes in terms of team-based learning, in terms of intra-group sharing, peer learning, and so on and so forth. Now, changes in the external environment, it is important that this learning design perhaps take into consideration what are some of the complexities that's happening in the current workplace environment. So there's been a shift and adoption of organic learning environment. So at least from my context, one of the very important things is how do you bring practicality, the flavor into a classroom, a face-to-face classroom. How do you do that? That's the biggest question that I have. I will probably reflect on. I'm very sure that all of you in your subject matter context, you would like to bring those flavor in class. Now, university and accreditation body in business schools are moving, at least for us, towards developing competency-based curriculum. And one of the motivation, at least for me, teaching management, leadership, cultural intelligence, those kind of qualitative subject that needs learning skills to be developed. Flipped learning plays a very important part in terms of making sure that we can do that in class. Now, characteristics that perhaps comprises of flipped classroom. Now, 2 points I want to emphasize: key trust, easily adaptable learning environment that facilitates, the key word here really about active learning. How would you facilitate active learning in class, as I've said, virtually or face-to-face physical classes, and allow students to develop skills and competencies. So when I talk about skills and competencies, things like, for example, specifically about problem solving, and I want to go deeper into problem solving in terms of critical thinking, and I'm talking about real life cases, for example, right? So on and so forth, the discussion, the interactions, the hands-on, perhaps allow this design, allow that to happen. Number two, I'm quite mindful in terms of learning culture. And that's very important because we know very well that country context, organizational context, how can, and perhaps even subject schools and even subject discipline context. So we need to understand the learning culture, be mindful of the learning culture, and I'll be very careful of trying to have a framework, contextualizing it in terms of understanding how we can implement it. For example, very quickly, I was actually teaching international students, mainland Chinese students mainland Chinese students, including people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and so on and so forth. So when I take this framework that we have developed and try to implement that into that context, I need to be very mindful of their learning culture, or culture of learning, so that I can actually tweak and I can customize appropriately to actually enhance the efficacy of how I can deliver those things. Now, two conceptual frameworks are modeled in responding to this reason demands, having to acknowledge the importance of both physical and virtual real time. I'm going to share with you in a minute of time the framework that we have designed. And obviously, we know very well the pandemic COVID-19 has put universities to rethink and redesign their lessons delivery. So this evidence-based, as you could see, evidence-based framework that we have developed, one of it is for face-to-face, specifically how people can actually adopt that. And one of the other one is virtual via Zoom, for example, asynchronous and synchronous learning. So let me just focus quickly on perhaps on the left-hand side, as you could see, the face-to-face physical seminar. So you could see that we separate that into two clusters here. One of it is pre-class online learning. So pre-class online learning, we have online learning for students that actually have to attend. Now, the key thrust, I would like all of us, or including myself, to reflect on, and I try to do that every time when I design the course, is basically about how do you engage students in the pre-class online learning, because it's going to be asynchronous. So questions like what we did was animations. I know it takes a lot of effort, right? But short animated videos, right? In terms of making the complex theories easy for them to understand, right? Voice over recorded lectures, I'm sure you have that, but one of the key things that we look at is that what are some of the shortfalls of recorded lectures? What are some of the pitfalls? How can we make it interesting? How can we make it engaging, right? So again, subject matter context comes into place, but you need to think through this very carefully. Interactive quizzes, right? For example, students actually can participate online and then they have responses immediately. So they have some feedback that they get and they can learn. And there is actually a system, or rather a place where they actually can feedback, or rather put their comments on, where other class peers can come in to input. On top of that, as a facilitator instructor, you can come in and kind of give certain comments. So what is this purpose for? The purpose of this is actually for students to kind of know all the answers? No, it's for them to perhaps come with questions so that when they come to the class, they ask, focus on certain questions, queries, and our discussion of facilitating the hands-on active learning makes it very worthwhile. Now, so the second part is about online reflection journal. So how did we did this in terms of efficacy? So what happened is that there are 13 lessons. So we created a case study, a mini case study that is connected to all the topics. So what happens if I'm a learner? I look at topic 1, how is it connected to topic 2, how is it connected to topic 3, all the way to topic 13, assuming over a semester. Now, each during the reflection journal is going to be not a lot of work, but I look at the key thrust of that particular lesson, right? They are supposed to do a 200 words reflection, right? Perhaps lesser than that. Sometimes, interestingly, some visuals will be involved, right? So on and so forth. And then I also have some discussion board forum, not all the time, but depending on the topic that is in there. So that is the outside classroom before they come to the class. And when they come to the class, as you could see, the first thing that we do is usually a mind map. We don't lecture, we have a mind map. And I tend to do different, I use different methodologies where to engage them in terms of interactivity, polling, for example. We have created our own authentic system, gamification, right? But engaging them to make sure that their queries have been answered, right? And some of the questions and clarification perhaps. And then we have a class discussion on the reflection journal that they have done, focusing on the key thrusts and questions that they may have. And last not least, the second part of the lesson is usually on a very hands-on basis. For example, case study, real life case study, right? We have, and these are media-related case studies, so they can actually visualize. I'll give you an example. I'm assuming I'm talking about GE, General Electric. I'm talking about manufacturing firm. We tend to show them in reality how it looks like, because assuming I'm talking about undergraduate students, and this is very, very much to bring them to reality or practicality of understanding what I'm talking about or what they're doing. Now, within the active learning activities, as you could see, there are two parts. We tend to look at different aspects: peer learning, collaborative learning. We have developed our own authentic system that allows to facilitate this, right? Unstructured activity collaboration. And then we also use traditional approaches, right? I'm a staunch believer to have a hybrid approach, right? Still, I'm in a very traditional approach, perhaps 20% or 15%, engaging them using a whiteboard, drawing certain aspects. So there's a good combination of everything: technology intervention, peer learning, collaborative learning, so on and so forth. Now, similarly, the mirror image, as you could see on the right-hand side, is for asynchronous and synchronous learning, right? So pre-class online learning framework remains the same. But on the right-hand side, as you could see, we have the same formatting, but it is being done slightly different because it's in a virtual environment. So we use slightly different sequencing systems and platforms. For example, one of it is I tend to use LAMS, which it is authentically built. I'll share with you a bit later on what is it all about, right? Activity sequences, peer review, jigsaw, and that allow people to be engaged on a virtual environment. Now, let me move on to the next part of applied case study. Some of the things that we thought is useful, and I thought probably be useful for all of you. Number one, thought process in designing e-learning. Some of the things that we may need to reflect on in terms of learning. Now, to me, learning, it's making sure that students come to class with questions, there is interactions. But in order for us to do that, what can we do? So we can talk about, one of the things that was quite powerful for us was animations, because the subject is such. So they get very engaged viewing those videos in a short videos. And usually my videos are 2 minutes, 3 minutes, to just capture their attention in different clusters. And then obviously I have a bit more traditional voiceover mini lectures with slides, but even then I try to look at what then engages them. Can there be interactivity within the voiceover lectures? So that's a question that I ask myself. So to a certain level, we put that in. Now, articles, blogs are very traditional, but I'm being very mindful of what I share. But the key word is contemporary. Why do I bring this in? Depending on your target audience, I tend to bring in what is happening right now pertaining to the topic, and short articles for them to relate back to the classroom context. Next one, mind maps. Now, to me, lesson summary, or I call that as mind map, is very powerful because they are able to show them the linkages between that particular lesson. Right? Again, we don't lecture, but we tend to focus on key concepts for them to conceptualize and then facilitate discussions from there. Right? And last but not least, they take visuals, and it is very useful for our subject where we want them to see visually what are some of the things that they are supposedly seeing. Now, for assessment and feedback, obviously there are different types which I've listed here. I'm very sure that you know about it. But one point that I would like to highlight is to understand what kind of assessment that you, especially asynchronous, because there's an online component part. I tend to have a mixture, but I'm very mindful of what I tend to use, basically linking to the learning outcomes. For example, if it is an MCQ, right, I tend to put critical thinking questions. The answers are not so easy, so that they will come back to class to perhaps dwell on it. So two answers would be probably almost coming to, if I'm a learner, I put myself and say that, okay, can it be A or C? So they'll come to class to have a debate on that. So that's pretty interesting. So the design comes in important. Last but not least, reflection. So reflection journal was one of the powerful things, and the efficacy of doing a reflection journal comes in very much high when we actually measure the efficacy in terms of learning outcomes, because they tend to do it, they tend to relate, they tend to apply before coming to the class. Obviously, discussion forum is pretty much a bit traditional, but I see value in that, depending on how you do it, not too much, but in the appropriate touch points. And of course, course blocks. And I use course blocks for them to reflect. Again, we need to be mindful that we don't overdo this, but again, trying to link that out with some level of assessment, some level of motivation for them to reflect on. Now, let me touch a bit on the asynchronous portion, what we have done. As you could see, we use LAMS for the design. This is pre-class online learning. This is very sequential, and anyone can do it. It's pretty much easy to learn. And this sequence help you to see, as you could see this sequence, you could exactly see, right? So what are some of the designs? For example, there's an introduction, you can put some videos in, you can actually put quizzes in, right? You could see a reflection journal in, right? What you see here is actually the students that come in. For example, there are 37 students at any one time. When you go, it is live. You could see how many students have completed what and where are they in the stage, right? Some of the animated videos, these are some samples, right, that are authentically done. This is something that I put in effort over a year, right, which really is worthwhile in my opinion. Right? Now, these are some of the quizzes. Earlier on, I spoke the instructions which are given to them specifically. And obviously, you could see that they actually can attend the quizzes, and of course, formative feedback will be immediately given, and there would be an option for them to participate in forums as well. Now, so again, reflection journal, I just want to show you what I've said. This is an example of reflection journal, right? Instructions given to them, and then there will be a mini case study. As you could see, this is suffice because I am just going to be very focused on the key thrusts, one or two key thrusts on that particular lesson for them to bring back to the class to discuss. And this is the tracking of participation. I'm very sure that instructors find this useful, and this is very important because this is where we collate data, right? At one look, the instructor is able to see, as you could see, the legend is here, completed is blue color, right? If someone is on the red color, they are still doing it, right? If they have not completed, you could have the green inverted triangle, right? So instructors are able to monitor the students' performance at any one time. Now, virtual time, I would like to share some of the synchronous learning part that we have done. Again, this is actually an authentic system that I have developed over a seed fund. It has been almost 4 years. Now I'm working on an enhanced version. If anyone is interested, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share the authentic version. This authentic version today has basically is about engaging students. We have class participation, we have peer review, we have a group collaborative aspect, we have question and answer. But the whole idea about this is to engage students. And how do I design this? I try to design this in the form of learning design where what is needed for the students, right? I'll give you an example very quickly. Q&A, most of our students may be very quiet when we ask questions to engage them. So in our system, what we do is that we try to clear the first hurdle. So there's an app where they actually can enter their questions first, enter their questions or clarification after you discuss a concept, and these are collated and this can be fleshed out, right? So you can actually put it as anonymous or with their names. Usually we put it anonymous so they don't feel very on the spotlight, right? So, and then we facilitate discussions, right? So another innovation that I would like to share is we leverage on LAMS to come out with different sequence activities. Things like, for example, one of the powerful things about peer review, right? Where we, in this peer review, is about intra-group, intergroup, right? Individual, right? So many aspects can be done, right? So in a class, for example, be it virtual or be it physical, we tend to use this so that before the instructor facilitate, we tend to get them discuss about their own answers, comment on their own answers, right? Like for example, jigsaw for me is very useful because I need to look at different stages of planning. So what happens is that each of the group, let's say I have 8 groups, each of the group will be focusing on one stage. And I make it like a corporate setting. So each group, each stage, and each department have to communicate with another department. So it becomes very interesting for them because I create a corporate setting, and they want to communicate in that aspect. So there's a lot of enthusiasm going on while they are learning, right? So these are things which I find that is very useful while having a bit of fun factor. They tend to be very engaged in their learning as well. Now, these are my sharings. These are some of the things that I reflect on, and I thought it'd be useful to share with all of you when designing online lessons. Number one, I think I always tell myself to be very clear on the expectations of the course. So the very first thing I look at is that what is this course meant for? What am I trying to achieve within a limited period of time? We can get lost when sometimes there's too many things. So I tend to be very focused on that. And I try to make my design very much correlated to that, number one. Number two, to me, providing detailed and explicit instructions is very important for our students, especially on asynchronous. Now, my experience of running and launching it the very first time in 2016, and after doing a review and over 2 semesters, I find that this aspect of making sure that the instructions and communication is crystal clear, and tend to look at what is going on the ground itself. Knowing the technology is important. I'm a staunch believer that don't put the technology in front, but perhaps understand what you want to do and pick the right technology. There's so many technological innovations out there, but what is then relevant for you? What kind of technology is then relevant for you? And I'm talking about asynchronous, for example. What then makes sense for your subject, and then it makes sense for the students and achieve the learning outcomes. Now, expect the unexpected, remain flexible. Now, upon saying that asynchronous have its own challenges, right, in terms of technology, and what are some of the things that you can be mindful of? Foresee that these are things that I would take note of. If there is a downtime for online, how do I then manage that? So I tend to look at those contingency plan, even if before I roll out this, so that I'm prepared, so that I don't, students are not panicky. If option 1 is not there, I go to option 2. If option 2 is then taken, then option 3. So it becomes very seamless in that aspect. Now, creating and maintaining a strong presence is very important in asynchronous. What do I mean by that? We don't want to give students a perception that, oh, okay, this is on my own all the way. And I have no instructor presence. No, you must think of a way that you are involved, not as an inspector, quote and unquote, but rather a facilitator, that you are there overseeing them. You are there to kind of help them when they need. So you need to think of that intervention creatively. Second last point, promoting reflection and communication through quality discussion. Now, for example, early on, as I said, when they do a quiz, they get the formative feedback, but there is an every for them to engage us. That's very important, because people would like not to be, put in unambiguous situation for very long. So what kind of communication? And most of the time, the online aspect is for them to not answer the questions, but basically to tell them that, hey, there's some guidance, some directions. And then when we come to the class, we can go at length of discussing about the nuances and so on and so forth. Now, last not least is to create a self-directed learning culture. Now, coming from a corporate life myself, I always emphasize to my student, we have a town hall meeting out there, ad hoc articulation. You need to learn by yourself. If we don't train you and put you in that kind of platform while you're in the academic, your journey of learning, how are you going to suddenly have that when you go out to the real world? So I think the last point is about value, right? I think we need to inculcate the value of self-directed learning. Now, very quickly on the research finding, the efficacy of the framework. So some of the things that we have done in terms of, this is only partially, I have not covered everything due to the time, I can't cover that, but just to give you a sense of what we've been doing. So we tend to look at students' response in terms of online learning experience, right? Appeal to the students. These are very important to us, because we want to find out from their perspective, how do they feel? How do they experience what they're doing? Now, it helps us a lot. I'm more interested in this percentage, very small percentage, right? Somewhat negative and even somewhat positive. How can I bring this towards positive and very positive? So specifically, there were questions that we want to engage this focus group on. And by and large, we actually sit down with them. Why do you feel negative about it? Is it because of your perception, or is it something to do with the design? How can we actually address your concerns? May not be 100%, but I think I'm interested in that. Now, flexibility is another aspect. A lot of students find that this is a 4 AU. So you may be wondering, Kumar, what if I ask them to do 1 hour work outside? No, Frankly speaking, I fought so hard to actually make sure that the 4 AU, 1 AU is within that 4 AU. So students feel that hey, it's still within the curriculum, it's not extra work that I'm doing. I think that is very, very important because students have a lot of other load as well. So I think we need to take care the well-being of students to make sure that we don't unnecessarily ask them to do more work. I mean, at least in my view, I think I strongly feel about that. Reflect and apply. This is something that we also find in terms of how application, in terms of application, what do they find? The effectiveness. Now, what I'm showing you is students' response. Obviously, there's validated thing that we have done beyond students' perception, right? But this was the very first thing that we were interested in. Now, one of the many things that we did was actually to measure in terms of implementation after flipped learning, right? So one aspect that we measured was critical thinking, problem solving, right? As you could see, prior to flipped learning and after implementation of flipped learning, right? You could see that the efficacy in terms of a couple of variables here that we measured, there was adequate kind of increase, right, as you could see, right, in different aspects. So that actually was quite convincing for us, where from 2.16 to 2.69, right? So we did this in different aspects, not only in critical thinking, but we did many other aspects as well, right? But just a sense of what we did. Now, recommendation and concluding thoughts before I open up for questions and interaction. I think that's more important. Let me just probably say some thoughts here. The online part must be mindfully designed, understanding the profile. Now, to me, we do understand the profile of students and participants differ in different institutions, and perhaps also because of different subjects that you are teaching. So understand that aspect. To me, the very first thing I did was to understand my participants. Who are they? Now, social cultural aspects is even more important in terms of cultural backgrounds, in terms of their learning culture. For example, specifically, I understood the composition of my students, the specialization. If they are international students, what is the percentage of international students, so that I can be more mindful, not trying to do my design in such a way, assuming that it may be effective for all. Now, second part I thought was important for us to take note was the technology-enabled part of online learning. That has to be, keyword, I want to emphasize, interactive. A certain level of interactivity has to be incorporated because we want to see that kind of exchanges, engaging students to dedicate their time and learning process, of course. Now, 1/3 of the total time, in my opinion and view, and I thought it was revalidated by evidences, to online portion and perhaps 2/3 to face-to-face. Now, face-to-face class must be designed, and I thought two important aspects here: application concepts with ample opportunity to have intra-group interactions, right, with group reviews, as well as interactions with individual as well as group levels. Now, how do we do that? Now, we need to, again, as I've said, every lesson, what do you want to achieve? And then how does this intergroup, intra-group peer learning help to enhance or probably achieve that? So that would always be my question. Second point is debates where entire class is involved. There's always time that I will give. And I think one of the challenges that we would probably face is that the class may go very silent. And that's where earlier on, as I've said, you need to think of creative intervention where you need to clear the first few hurdles. I did share with you on the Q&A app that I came out with, so that we kind of clear their first hurdle. So at least I can kind of engage them, or probably not put them on the spot by calling them their names simply so easily as a first level. Now, the assessment design a bit for the class participation specifically, when I talk about interactivity or active learning, three things that I thought is very important. Number one, quality contribution of views. I tend to look and focus and emphasize in my classes on quality contribution. It's not about simply people raising up their hands and trying to just contribute or say something. So I tend to have my design very much focused on quality contribution. So once a culture is ingrained, you could see a lot of valuable discussions happening. Number two, asking challenging and yet critical thinking questions. So again, for the students, I advocate them. I try to use expert participating team, try to advocate this culture of asking them questions, ad hoc questions. It's not going to be easy, but eventually if you are persistent and if you are able to come up with the right interventions, you can do it, I think. Advocating the learning culture to articulate confidently, and again, with certain aspects of why you rationalize, right? Why you say what you say. I tend to always advocate this. Don't say things just out of the blue that is your opinion. Try to have some rationale. So this helps you to go into the aspect of saying quality things at the right time, and also to present your confidence. And yeah, last not least, before I kind of wrap up, improvised framework leverages on flipped classroom philosophy and authentically self-designed scaffolding support system. Two things that I thought is our goals. Number one, firstly, for this specific aspect is to keep learners very engaged or more engaged through a structured collaborative approach. So that even, for example, for me, when I run a course for 700 students, I kind of manage almost like 9 to 10 instructors or even more sometimes. How do I have standardization in terms of quality? That's always my thought. Even I can't depend on the, with all due respect, with my colleagues' facilitation skills, but I must have certain system put in place so that the quality is taken care of. Number two, to have more deeply and critically thought through course content, learning from peers, engagement in terms of in that perspective. Last, I just would quickly like to just share. I think Mark, if you, I think you could get a copy if you like to read a bit more on what I've done on chapter 2 on this flipped classroom. Right? And I've shared some blogs that you also could be able to take note and go in and see what I've been doing. With that, I think I've come to the end of my presentation, and then I am happy to take any questions, and I'll pass the baton to Mark.
Thank you so much, Kumaran. Very valuable talk, and thank you also for providing the links to those resources.
Welcome.
Test.
So we're going to have some time now to ask Kumaran some questions about what he's been speaking about. So if you'd like to put a question in the chat or raise a hand, please go ahead. Okay, well, I have a question for you while people are thinking about it. I was looking through your book, and it does say that dynamic illustrations are much better than static ones. And you said that you have lectures with animations. Here at NUS-CELC suggests we use Evidencebased. I don't know if that's software that you've used yourself.
Sure.
Have you really found that this type of software has quite an impact on students' engagement?
Right. Thanks, Mark. I think that's a very important as well as interesting question. Let me try my best to answer that question. Now, so as I said, I think the whole idea of us using videos or animations or any non-static aspect is to bring to me, instead of the platform or intervention, I would probably be very focused on what are we trying to achieve? Right? What are we trying to achieve? What does the video try to achieve? Now, I think that should be our focus. Let me give you an example. Right? For example, earlier on, as I said, I would like to do a case study on a manufacturing production firm. If I'm teaching undergraduate students, I'll be very focused on making sure that they before they get to a case study of manufacturing and production firm, do they really have they seen? Can I give them a tour? For example, I'm just giving a specific example. Now, that's one part. Now, we also need to think of how do we then try to make them reflect on concepts that perhaps not downloading information, but can we make them relate, number one, relate to what we are trying to say, what we are trying to advocate. Number two, the concepts that can be very dry, right? Some of our subjects, like for example, I always envy science and chemistry and physics that I, perhaps in terms of, not easier, but, probably more apparent. But in terms of management and leadership, how do we bring those dry concepts alive, right? That's my question. So I think when I think of that, I try to first get students' engagement in a short period of time, but also try to use dynamic visuals. For example, like planning stages. So what I do is to, instead of just telling them these are the stages, I will try to tell them an anecdote, but in terms of trying to have the visuals there. So I'm happy to share, the videos if it is allowed, if NQ allowed to do so. So what they do is, if I'm a learner and I don't have any experience, assuming undergraduate student, when by viewing this, I would have a good understanding of, oh, okay, this is how it happens in the pragmatic point of view, as well as theoretically grounded, this is the concept. So I try to go in that line, and I'm very sure that in your subject area, like for example, communication, there would be difficulties and challenges, but I think the whole idea is about us start thinking of how do we actually try our very best to put that in. As I say, cost is effective, I do understand that. So how do we get free resources, leverage on those things that may not incur a lot of difficulty on us? So I hope that shed some light. Jason has some, I think Jason, you raised something.
Yes, okay, thank you for your talk, Kumar. The question I have about is about your pre-class activities for sort of the fully online model, because this is something many of us are teaching on right now, sort of the fully online model due to current restrictions. Now, I concentrate on forum work, in terms of getting the students prepared for class. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because in terms of preparation, I feel it's always hit or miss, even if it's required. And, even now I've got, this semester I have 100% participation for all of my activities, but not 100% completion in terms of what's going on. And so is there anything that if we're thinking about these activities that we can go and look for in the scholarship, or if you talked about it particularly in your own book?
Thank you, Jason. I think it's an important question. Let me try my best to answer your question. Right now, you were asking how do I get students engaged, or probably more scaffolded manner. First of all, engagement. Let me talk about that. So, fortunately, when I transform this course, I try to put a certain percentage of component of assessment for pre-class online learning. Now, we know very well that students. I'll be very authentic here. Students probably need some motivation to get the online thing done. So we have tried without that. Now, I think then you have to be very strong on your cultural aspect. I'll talk about that in a minute of time, but let me talk about what I've done, what we have done, and it was quite successful. Now, the aspect of assessment plays a very important part. Now, when you put the assessment, and usually they have to complete 24 hours before, because we have time. So the instructors have time to review before going to the class. So 24 hours is a requirement for them to complete. And one of the things that I try to advocate is that usually I open 2 lessons prior, assuming, so they can actually be faster, or as long as they finish 24 hours, wherever you do, doesn't matter. Now, another thing that I tell them is that in that data analytics that we use, we'll be able to track the students, not only track the students, but also know whether are they simply clicking the videos, right? How are they viewing the videos? Now, that is for the instructor, all the details are there. So in one click, I'll be able to see holistically whether this guy is trying to go through the flow, or trying to, perhaps, really doing the job. So that is quite useful. But I think beyond that, let me come to the culture part of it. It takes me some time. To me, I think one of the key things is about, I try to advocate to the students that self-directed learning, I think it's a bit on the value system. And that, as I've said, you want to solve immediately, I think you must give them some level of assessment or some level of motivation in some creative way. I'm not too sure whether there's a second way out of it, because I think students, being intelligent students, bright students, they'll probably put their effort in the right place, right? So that one, we have to, I think, be very authentic about it. But I think if you want to look at the bigger picture, and I'm talking about postgraduate students, right? So postgraduate students, as you know, is slightly different. They come for a different reason. Now, taking those learning from a postgraduate student, coming back to undergraduate student, I tend to advocate this culture. Now, the first 2-3 semesters, you need to really work very hard with your instructors. With all due respect, I think I have a good team to advocate the same inclined value system. So that help us, because I think once that is done, by and large, you may not get 100%, but I think it makes a lot of move in there. Now, you also maybe perhaps the second part before I kind of, if there's any further questions from you. You also asked in terms of BIM, how do you make it a bit more careful? Now, I think we need to be very clear, what do you want to achieve out of the pre-class online learning? For me, two things, very simple. Number one, I want them to come to class with questions, with contents, but come with questions. Right? So engagement is very short videos. I try to put interesting thing in there where it's very participative, as I said, it's not very monotonous. So to me, if I'm a learner, do I want to watch what I've designed? Ask myself. So I try to do that to my close students, and I ask them to say, okay, tell me authentically, will you do it or not? So I think those critical feedback help us. That's number one. And number two, I think the reflection journal for me makes a lot of sense, because I think I'm just asking them to do maybe around 100 words, 150 words. But because it's a case, it's a narrative, like a story, they are very interested to know what happens and how that topic kind of flow. Specifically. So I hope I've shed some light, Jason. I'm happy you asked about scholarship. You can email me. I may have certain articles on beyond my book. I'm happy to help you if that helps.
Good, good. No, that's great. I've also experimented with having students, develop the sort of forum discussion. So they're required to sort of post the questions that everyone else engages with. And that has, for the most part, been positive. Sometimes it falls flat, but having students know that they're going to be responsible for doing this later on makes them more likely to engage responsibly, when it's their turn to answer. So it's just interesting to me how different people approach the whole discussion forums, since the students still treat them as sort of an archaic piece of technology nowadays.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions? Remember, you can put it in the chat or raise a hand.
Oops.
I have another question for you, Kumaran. I have plenty. It seems to me that the courses that you designed for the flipped learning classroom are quite course designer centric. In other words, you can see your flair in that course design quite a lot. Do you find that the other tutors who teach on the module can personalize that quite well with their flipped classroom approach, or do you find that it's more difficult rather than face-to-face getting other tutors to personalize the course materials?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's a very interesting thing. I would come from change management perspective. To be honest, it is never an easy path. The very first thing due to transformation, I think we all know about it, is to get them involved, take their views. I have a different profile of students, profile of instructors, sorry about that. Different profile of instructors where I have roughly around 40% of full-timers and 60%, it changes a bit here and there, but 50-50, I would say, where we have part-time instructors. So part-time instructors these are senior guys who just come in and teach and go. Now, one of the key things that I keep in mind is the entire thing is about change management. So what are some of the hindrances, some of the challenges that I would probably face from a human perspective, right? So I address that in a very, very start aspect, not by implementing it, trying to get them engaged. What are some of the concerns they should have, for example, technology, right? I don't think training alone would probably help. What are they comfortable with? What do they see value in? Traditionally, I'm doing 7 steps. Now I need to only do 2 steps. Is helping you and your students. So that kind of advocate, buying in, addressing their concerns, this can be very fundamental, but it really helps me quite a bit. I spend quite a bit of time building that relationship, also to a certain extent with certain of my helping of IT, I have to acknowledge in MBS, trying to guide them in the initial stages. Once they get hang out of it and they believe that this works, that's something that I think as a course lead you have to do. you have to be very mindful of the different facilitation skills. Some of them are very good in content aspect, but not saying that they are not good in facilitation, but perhaps they need some help. So how do you can give them those things? So to me, summary, change management strategies, as well as understanding the concerns of human beings, is very important before even we talk about implementation. I think your question was about implementation and how do people personalize those things. And last not least, by empowerment, I tend to give them not one tool. And I told them that if you have a better tool and better way of doing things, I'm open about it. We can change it. We can change course of it. So they are very, I give them quite a bit of autonomy. The whole idea is, for me, it's not about emphasizing on technological tools. My motivation is that how can I help you? How can I make students learn more? It's not about particular technological tool. My motivation is that the facilitation of the entire thing, if we can go as a team. So I think that kind of spirit and that kind of perhaps outlook helps me quite a bit. But I'm still learning.
Because we have similar setups here where, you know, part-time instructors teach a module. Yes. Yeah, so. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Earlier, I think Sylvia raised up the hand, but I think, Sylvia, would you maybe?
Yes, it was me. Actually, I have a very similar question to what Mark has asked, because I'm very glad you brought up this idea of strengthening the teaching team before we can actually make a difference in the way our students learn. And I think that shared understanding among the different members of the team is important. So building that team spirit, that common purpose that we are working towards is very important. But okay, a related question I can think of leading on from there is that, you know, with the limited interactions we have, especially with some of the part-timers, that can be quite a challenge in a sense, you know, with, you know, and so I was just wondering if you have any recommendations on how we can actually strengthen that bond, or at least come to a kind of a shared understanding of what we are all trying to achieve.
Sure. I think, Sylvia, thanks for asking that important question. Let me try my best to answer to my best ability. Now, I've been over a decade here managing this course. One of the course, other than the postgraduate classes that I do teach, is this particular course that was invited on, I mean, as a pilot to transform. My experiences, drawing from my experiences, I think the first very thing is about trying to keep a cohort. And you know, part-timers, sometimes they come in, they go out. But I try my very best, despite the fact that there will be challenges, to keep a cohort and try to, despite whatever reasons they are there for, I try to understand their motivations of being there. There are many different motivations of why they are being there, especially the senior guys who come in and teach. Some of them, they would like to want to give back, but there are some other reasons as well, many other. I try to understand them, or a cup of coffee or a cup of coffees many times, and try to anchor that. And that helps me to understand how I could relate to what they could do, what are some of the challenges. Now, I tend to be very authentic about acknowledging the limitations. Sometimes I may not have solutions, but I tell them that I will take note and try my very best to do what I can do. So those kind of commitments, but again, I think we all know as human beings, there must be some moves of when you make certain commitments. I try my very best within my ability in different forums, in different avenues to try to bring those and address those limitations. So I think for me, building the relationships earlier, as what you put across, makes a lot of sense. And it's very powerful because that helps you to have a team. Now, there will be changes, especially when newcomers come into place. I try to guide them and try to be with them as a buddy system. And that effort helps you because they feel very comforted. They feel that there's a commitment done. Now, of course, on your part, one of the important things is that you hopefully you don't burn out. You try to do what you could do. But I try to draw resources from other colleagues as well. I try to find inspirations from other colleagues as well. It's none that is going to be a very smooth journey, but you tend to try to learn how it kind of, do that. So these are some of the strategies I tend to use before even we talk about transformation. I think, thanks, Sylvia, for asking that question.
And thanks, that was very well put through. I mean, the humanness of the teaching team and the camaraderie, I think is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think there's a question, Mark, before you want to wrap.
Hi, Kumar. Could you share a bit more about the learning culture of students? References to undergraduate learning would be useful. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Umar, for asking the question. Learning culture of students, perhaps I look at it in a very succinct manner. Key thrust is about understanding the profile of students. When I say profile of students, obviously, for example, with all due respect to all students, sometimes you need to understand where they come from: business school, engineering school, science school. One is the ability to a certain extent. It may not vary distinctively in premium universities like NTU, SMU, or NUS, but nonetheless, I tend to be very mindful of the specialization, because they may be trained in a certain way. They may look at certain aspects. Let me give you an example, right? We have this resonance engineering program, REP, where we have the top A-level students coming in, and they are trained in the engineering aspect. They are very good in the quantitative aspect. But when they come to a qualitative subject, it's always about trying to match, right? Because most of their subjects are quantitative. So that would be important to understand the profile of students. So when I say culture, institutional culture is one important thing. My experience of why I say this is important is because teaching in different institutions, understanding the culture and how students and instructors and how it operates is very important, because then we tend to be able to customize. Now, you may also go into the aspect of international students, for example. The composition of students, to me, is about specialization, the inclination of quantitative, qualitative, international students. So those aspects come into importance when I talk about culture of learning or learning culture in a particular aspect, especially when I'm invited to teach in another school, for example, or for example, a major, double major, an engineering student or science student taking a major in business compared to my business students. I don't treat them specifically, very simplistically, just the same. I don't use the same model. I tend to understand what are some of their strengths. I tend to understand how they've been operating, what are some of the subjects they've been doing, so that I'm able to reflect better. I'm able to serve them in terms of their facilitation better. I hope I've given some thoughts. Umar, I'm happy to share it through Mark in the book, that the areas that I've talked about learning culture. Maybe that would be helpful for you. I hope I've...
Yes, I recommend that everyone reads Kumaran's book. I mean, especially chapter 2, as was stated in the email, because it does focus on flipped learning in particular. But the other chapters are also very interesting with use of technology. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kumaran, for your time. I think that's all we have time for today. And we've been very lucky to have such an interesting talk, and been so we've learned a lot from it. It's been so educational. We'll be sending a small token of appreciation to Kumaran for this talk to say thank you. Okay,
thank you, Mark, thank you, Mark, and everyone taking your time of your busy schedule as well to attend that. Attend the talk. And the questions especially, it makes me think, it makes me reflect, and of course it's also a learning exposure for me. So thanks, Mark, specifically for inviting me to share this with our colleagues. Appreciate it. Bye-bye, take care.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you much, man. No problem. Bye-bye.
Sorry, I started a bit later.
Yes, okay, no problem.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.